Welcome to another day of Bible study. My name's Kevin Young, and I have the privilege of serving at Christ's Table as lead clergy. If you'd like to know more about Christ's Table, all you need to do is visit the URL that's right there, www.christstable.today. We're a group of people that are working alongside those who are disconnected, disillusioned, or done with the church. You can find out more information there, and I would encourage you to sign up for the email list there so that you will know all of the happenings around Christ's Table. One other thing that I want to make sure that you are aware of, though, we have all of the resources for this study available to you. Actually, most of the resources are absolutely free, no strings attached. Don't even have to put in an email address to get it. It's our gift to you. If you'd like to get the resources, both the reading schedule for this study as well as the curriculum for this study, all you have to do is go to that URL right there at the bottom of the screen, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. Now, I will say that if you'd like to have the printed version of the PDF, as well as a New York Times bestselling book that kind of goes along with this, and some other transformation and fun resources as well, there's a button on that URL that you can click that just says Get the Box. We have these spiritual resource boxes that we send for free to those who are regular donors, but you can get one as well. It includes this. Let me hold that correctly. It includes this printed copy of the study guide that goes along with this study. It also includes this book, The Sweet Spot by Paul Bloom. This is a great book. It talks about suffering from a secular perspective. And all you got to do is go to that URL right there if you're interested in either the free resources or the spiritual formation resource box. One other thing that I want to make sure that you're aware of, if you do have difficulties, doubts, questions with your faith or with God, a few months ago released this book, Reconstructing Your Faith. You may not be actually at the point of knowing whether or not you want to reconstruct your faith, and that's okay. This book actually very clearly walks through that, and it gives you the opportunity to write your own story and your own journey. To find out more information about this book, all you got to do is go to drkevinyoung.com. So today we find ourselves tackling the second part of the journey in 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. Now, what we have found as we have begun to discuss this idea of 1 Peter, and we're working through 1 Peter, is that 1 Peter has a theme, and that theme is suffering. Specifically, and I love the way that N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, says the theme about this book is that this suffering is the means by which the quality of Christians' faith can shine out all the more. And when Jesus is finally revealed, this will result in an explosion of praise. A lot of words there, and it does sound a little theological. It sounds a little churchy, but essentially boiled down that suffering can have some positive or redemptive purpose. As we walk through this, we'll talk through the idea that God actually send suffering. Does suffering have to be redemptive? Those are questions that we're going to ask ourselves as we work through this conversation. But I think on the surface, we can say at least that from Peter's perspective here, it seems as though suffering can potentially be redemptive for followers of Jesus Christ, at least. And no matter what that looks like, even if it doesn't end up being redemptive, when Jesus is finally revealed, that suffering will result in an explosion of praise, specifically from Christ himself for having endured. So at the very beginning here of 1 Peter, we have a prayer. Now, you might not immediately recognize these first few opening sentences of 1 Peter being a prayer, but they are a prayer. And so as you're reading through these first few verses, today is 6 and 7, it continues on past 6 and 7. Actually, it's 10 verses long. I think starting in verse 3, going to 12 or 13, if I'm correct there. It is a prayer, and it's kind of modeled on this typical Jewish prayer called the Shemona Ezra, or the 18 benedictions, which is a series of blessings to God. And so whenever we come to today's passage, also yesterday's was a part of this, tomorrow's will be a part of it as well, we're thinking about these words through the lens of them being a prayer. So prayers sometimes contain theology, but are not written to be strong doctrine or theology. We'll find some of that in this prayer, but specifically what we're looking at here is Peter's hopes, Peter's dreams and preferences. We're looking at Peter's worries and goals, and Peter's advocacy both to God, and because this prayer is being read by the audience of those places where foreigners and strangers are living outside of their ethnic and religious communities, it's also a prayer to them as well. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right into the text, and we'll just work our way through these couple of verses here this morning. So be truly glad, Peter says, which is a very interesting phrase to use for people who are in the midst of suffering. And we're not just talking about they're being made fun of by people around them. We're not just talking about their faith is not taken seriously. We're not just talking about use of the words season's greetings or happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. We're talking about Christians losing their life. We're talking about Christians being hunted down. We're talking about Christians being burned at the stake here. So be truly glad must ring odd to those people who are listening to Peter begin this letter with a prayer. Hopefully, Peter will come around to explain and flesh out this idea of how to be glad, how to be sweet in moments of bitterness. There is a wonderful joy ahead. Peter admits it may not feel like it now. You may not see any of it now, but ahead there is wonderful joy, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. This idea of health and wealth, gospel as it's been called, that Christ will never send you more than you can bear, that the blessings of God can always, in any moment and in any circumstance, overcome the difficulties in life, that if you just have enough faith in Jesus, if you pray enough, if you do enough, if you have enough integrity, that the bad things in life, the suffering will avoid you. The Bible over and again confirms that it just doesn't work that way here as well. Even though you must endure trials for a little while, sometimes you just don't have a choice, right? Sometimes you have absolutely no input as to whether or not you are going to be made to suffer, whether it be for your faith or for other things in life. These trials will show, though, that your faith is genuine. This is really kind of riffing off of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are you when you're persecuted, when people shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And I'm just recognizing that that's from the King James Version, because all of my memorization is from the King James Version. If I'm quoting something from memory, it's probably going to be from the King James, because that's what most of my life was spent reading. These trials will show, though, that your faith is genuine. Whenever you have these trials, whenever you go through difficulties, whenever you are persecuted, you need to understand that it is a sign that your faith is genuine. Now, we talked about yesterday the difficulty of comparing ourselves to suffering. Nothing that anyone, I think, in U.S. America as a Christian goes through is comparable at all to the suffering here. But we do suffer. We run into difficulties every single day. Sometimes those difficulties are on the basis of our faith, but sometimes those difficulties just happen to people of faith. It doesn't matter that you were a person of faith or a follower of Jesus. It just happened. But whenever you walk through suffering, your disposition, the way you respond to it, the way we frame it, the way we endure it, shows that our faith is genuine. That we're trusting in something outside of ourselves, that we're trusting in something greater than ourselves, Peter says here. Specifically, for this group of people, Peter says, you know what? Your faith is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. I don't think that Peter is implying here that their faith had to be tested in order to prove, but that when their faith is tested, it purifies them. Just as fire tests gold and purifies gold to see that it's gold, right? Whenever it happens, so does trials whenever they come into your life. How you respond to those trials shows the genuineness of your faith, as fire shows the genuineness of the gold. But Peter steps back and says, you are far more precious than gold. And I think that this is an important reminder, especially to those people who are struggling, whether it be for their faith or for any reason, that you matter, that you are far more precious specifically to God, Scripture says, than gold. But I think Peter is also leaving this open-ended because you have value, not just to God, but even though you may not see it, you have value to the community in which you live in. Even if they don't see it, you have value to the community in which you live in. You have value in the community of faith to other followers of Jesus. Even if you don't see it, even if they don't see it, you have value. Even if you struggle, even if you have doubt, even if you have questions, even if you're on the margins or the fringes, even if you're on the way out, you have value. This is a theme that we'll see here in the book of 1 Peter, is this idea of value and how you have value, and how suffering does not define your value. Circumstances in which you go through does not define your value. And even, I would say, Peter would say, the response, whether you thrive or fail in any given moment of suffering or struggle, whether or not you succeed, endure as well as you wanted to or not, doesn't affect your value. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. And so here we have the second half of that theme of the entire book for Peter, is that when your faith remains strong, no matter what it encounters, even though you may not see resolution, even though you may not hear praise from those around you, you will one day. And he looks forward to this moment that was the hope that they had, that Jesus would be revealed to the whole world. That when he returns, then all would see. The Christians who had suffered would be vindicated. And that Jesus would use that classic phrase, well done, my good servant. Well done, my faithful servant. Peter is hinting here at this idea of joy. That in the bitter, there can be sweet. And maybe the only way to survive the bitter in life is for there to be sweet. In a phrase, joy despite suffering. Not joy that ignores suffering, not joy that enjoys suffering, not joy that downplays suffering, not joy that embraces suffering like a masochist, but joy despite something, despite suffering, joy despite the circumstances. That two things can be true at one time. Joy and suffering can be true at the same time. That two things can be happening and held at the same moment. The pain of suffering and the joy of knowing that you have value, that God loves you, that you are truly not alone, and that in the end, all will be set right. Joy despite suffering. Sweet despite bitter. I just want to make sure to remind you that you can get all of the resources for this study right there at that URL, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. Take advantage of that.